This is the other subject of our talk, is electricity in its wild, pure form. You're looking at about 100-foot long, 440,000 volt, 1,000 ampere electrical discharge. That just doesn't want to go away, but continues to grow. These are the things that the electrical power industry was almost brought to its knees on in trying to tap. So Plato's thinking was to produce schemes more or less independent of existence on the basis of all being, and they were totalitarian in nature. Where Aristotle is the systematic experience of the surrounding universe, truth attained progressively through the work of individual efforts. Now, Oliver Heaviside breaks this down a little further in the concept of natural philosophy. All of these people, Heaviside, Maxwell, Thomson, everybody that we're going to be talking about consider themselves a natural philosopher. It's a mode of thinking that doesn't really exist anymore today. Now, Heaviside broke the natural philosophy down into two terms, those of the vitalists, which dealt with the living world, and that of the materialists, which dealt with the non-living world, which of course is us as electrical engineers. Now, we can find the basic beginnings of science out of Aristotle's thought, but it had to be modified by an English Franciscan friar by the name of Ockham in 1350. He broke tradition with medieval thinking around 1350 and can be called the father of modern science. His line of reasoning led to Copernicus, then Galileo and Kepler. The mode of thinking was now how instead of why. Descartes in the 1600s continued the line of reasoning and developed the first concept of the ether, which is the most important concept in dealing with electricity. Descartes regarded a metaphysics beyond the physical. He called it the last part to be studied, as it is necessary to have previous knowledge of many things. The study of electricity, considering the electric phenomenon as non-physical, is hereby, by Descartes' reasoning, a metaphysical and not a physical study. And this is the center of the whole problem. Okay, now Erasmus in 1509 gave a basic description of pre-Descartes thinking, which basically is where we are back again today. He said, there are innumerable niceties concerning notions, relations, instants, and formalities, which no one can pry into unless they have eyes that can penetrate the thickest darkness. The very state that Erasmus complains of in 1509 has been reborn in the concepts of relativity and what I refer to as quantum mysticism. Tesla states, the scientists from Franklin to Morse were clear thinkers and did not produce erroneous theories. Scientists today think deeply instead of clearly. One must be sane to think clearly, but one can think deeply and be quite insane. Today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. That's a pretty heavy statement for Tesla to make. Now, Edwin Armstrong, after being ripped off by RCA for his FM invention, really summed up the concept the best with the phrase, they substitute words for reality and then talk about the words. Heaviside gives his idea on what science is really about in his era, in very complicated statements. There is no self-contained theory possible apart from practical meaning. For a language is used in its enunciation, which implies that developed ideas and complicated processes of thought are already in existence, besides the general experience associated therewith. We define things in a phrase using words. These words hail to be explained by other words, and so on forever in a complicated maze. There is no bottom to anything. We are all antipodians and upside down. The misinterpretation of J.J. Thomson's discovery of the electron greatly hampered the understanding of electricity. And in 1900, Steinmetz summarizes the situation in one of his books. He says, unfortunately, to a large extent in dealing with the dielectric field, the prehistoric conception of the electrostatic charge on the conductor still exists, and thereby its use destroys the analogy between the two components of the electric field, the magnetic and the dielectric, and make the consideration of the dielectric field unnecessarily complicated. In actuality, it eliminates the dielectric field and makes it so that you can't calculate it and substitutes electron flow in its place. Wires are not conductors of electricity. This misconception of so-called conductors or wires carrying electricity like water in a pipe was continuously attacked by Heaviside in his writings. An entire article is written on the matter titled, A Perfect Conductor is a Perfect Obstructor, but does not absorb the electromagnetic energy of the wave. A perfect conductor is a perfect obstructor, but does not absorb the electromagnetic energy of the waves. Heaviside states, it was discovered by mathematical reasoning that when an electric current is started in a wire, it begins entirely at its skin, in fact upon the outside of the skin, and that, in consequence, sufficiently rapidly impressed fluctuations of the current keep to the skin of the wire and do not sensibly penetrate its interior. The concept of electron flow in wires rather than electrical field flow around the wires can be related to seeing the footprints of the invisible man in the snow. Heaviside says, now, very few, if any, mathematical electricians, he's writing this in about 1890, very few, if any, mathematical electricians can understand this fact. Many of them neither understand it or believe it. Even many who do believe it so do not because they are told so, I believe, simply because they can in the least feel positive about the truth of their own knowledge. An eminent practitioner remarked after prolonged skepticism, If Sir Thompson says so, who can doubt it? What a world of worldly wisdom lies in that remark. That's Heaviside's quote. The relativists, with their concept of distorted measurement, or curved space, replacing an ether, and their concept of the equity of matter and energy, work great harm into electrical sciences. A post-Maxwellian theory of electromagnetism was to prevail, ignoring the works of Tesla. Tesla states, "For more than 18 years, I have been reading treatises, reports of scientific transactions, and articles on Hertz wave theory to keep myself informed, but they've always impressed me of works of fiction. Energy-matter equivalency, as propounded by the relativists, serves to distort the proper understanding of the continuity of energy as represented by Heaviside. The false doctrines of the law of conservation of energy has a deleterious impact on the findings of Steinmetz and others that electrical energy can be synthesized. Relativism sought to eliminate the concept of electricity in its entirety through the denial of the concept of the ether and plunged science into a giant glut of Platonic thinking and thereby established a type of religion. The influence, somewhat forceful, of the British thinking on science has been also a serious impediment upon the growth of electrical science. Foremost was the British Association, establishing a distorted system of units, ohms, farads, and what have you, representing electrical quantities. The effects were disastrous. Arbitrary factors such as 4 pi or the speed of light squared stuck to the electrical units like crap on shoes. The relativists took these parasitic factors, which have no meaning in real terms, and fabricated an entire way of thinking out of them. Heaviside used the phrase, the brain-wasting perversity of the British. Euler describes British thinking on gravity as, the English maintain that attraction is a property essential to all bodies, mutually to approach as if they were impelled by feeling. Other philosophers consider this opinion as absurd and contrary to the principles of rational philosophy. What was happening is the British were trying to say there was nothing in between the objects that attract, such as magnets, that it was purely the bodies themselves, and space in between was void of any acting material, which has to be complete nonsense if you're going to deal with electricity. That's where the ether comes in. English natural philosophers such as J.J. Thomson totally ignored the work of Americans such as Tesla. To quote Heaviside, this seems strong language, but as Professor Tate tells us, that it is almost criminal not to know several 4 languages, which is a venial offense in the opinions of others. It seems necessary to employ strong language when the criminality is more evident. It must be severe and logical. This is why Heaviside was eventually banned from writing, at least for a while. Upon giving up, Tesla states, I am unwilling to afford to some small-minded and jealous individuals the satisfaction of having thwarted my efforts. My project was retarded by nature and the world was not prepared for it. But the same laws will prevail in the end and make a triumphal success. I think you can see from the beginning of my talk that none of these people are very happy. Has anybody got that idea? A force which manifests in so many different kinds of matter seemed to need a name of its own, and accordingly, Gilbert gave to it the name electric, which it has ever retained. So the birth of the word electric then became established in 1646 AD. Michael Faraday, in 1831, makes public his theory of an electrified ether consisting of polarized corpuscles forming tubules of electric induction. He begins his study of the analogies between motional and statical electrical currents. Here begins the science of electricity. James Maxwell, in 1855, at the conclusion of Faraday's research and development of the contiguous ether concept, sets out to construct a mechanical model of electrodynamic actions. He wrote, by careful study of the laws of elastic solids, the motions of viscous fluids, I hope to discover a method of forming a mechanical conception of this electronic state adapted to general reasoning. It has been said that Maxwell put the math to Faraday. The impact that Maxwell's ideas had on the emerging electric science was truly profound. Utilizing the recently developed ideas of Newton, Leibniz, and Hamilton, Maxwell produced a mathematical concept of electricity, one that stands to this day. Oliver Heaviside, in 1895, begins to publish a series of articles titled On Electromagnetic Induction and Its Propagation. Here Heaviside develops what he calls electromagnetic theory from the Faraday-Maxwell point of view. By 1888, Heaviside was banned from publishing through the efforts of a Mr. Preece of the British Post Office Telegraphy Administration. Heaviside was called a disgrace to the Royal Society. However, Oliver Heaviside established electrical engineering as we know it today. So Steinmetz was given credit for being allowed by his employer to create electricity from the square root of -1. And this is where we enter the basic theory of the talk. Is it possible to synthesize electrical energy? In which Steinmetz, Tesla, and others threw their ideas back and forth about these. Professor William Anthony stated at the closing of the meeting that within 1 year they were going to have a self-sustaining electrical system that didn't need any fuel. This was in the 1890s. Where is it today? Steinmetz began a study of what's called synchronous parameter variation. The meaning of this is the variation of energy storage coefficients, such as inductance or capacitance or resistance, with respect to a point in time on the AC cycle is the cause of what Steinmetz says, is caused by what Steinmetz says, the lack of uniformity and pulsation of the magnetic field, causing a distortion of the induced EMF at open circuit as well as under load. The pulsation of reactance causing higher harmonics under load. He's speaking about generators and motors now. The pulsation of resistance causing the same harmonics. That was the big flame you saw at the beginning, leaping off the disconnect switch. Now the normally constant or time invariant coefficients change in value with respect to time. Now we have a peculiar set of dimensions of henries per seconds, ohms per seconds, farads per seconds, and sievens per seconds. And this is where the concept of the law of conservation of energy comes apart. Because the energy is appearing and disappearing in these relationships without any equality or connection anymore. Energy can either vanish or energy can appear in the system. Steinmetz states in Article 241 of his Theory and Calculation of Alternating Current Phenomena, published in New York in 1900, the following. We find here a case of a circuit in which the power factor, that is, the ratio of watts to volts amperes, differs from unity without any phase displacement in the phase of the cycle. That is, while the current and the EMF are in phase with each other, but are distorted, the alternating wave cannot be replaced by an equivalent sine wave, since the assumption of equivalent sine wave would introduce a phase displacement of an angle that doesn't exist. This condition made itself apparent in the line switching equipment of the primordial electrical industry. Let's see if we have something. Now, this is a prime example of what happens. Okay, we're trying to turn off a 220,000 volt power line, and this is the switch. It stands about 50 feet high. Now, what they've done is, in order to eliminate the oil tanks, which normally break the main discharge, they're using vacuum columns. And what it is the mechanism breaks the circuit inside the vacuum columns. But being that there's no gas or oil or anything to carry the current through to the zero part of the cycle, the voltage tends to the voltage tends to raise to infinity, trying to maintain the power flow. This is where the switches start to explode as they're opening here. Now, normally these cells here break the electrical circuit in the vacuum so there can be no arc, but that's kind of the last thing you want to do because the momentum of the electricity will come thundering back down the line to try to keep it going. And what I just read from Steinmetz is in the actual arcs where the switch contacts are breaking open, is you start to get energy anomalies in these arcs. And the system goes into a cumulative oscillation and continues to accumulate energy until something blasts. So as we go through the opening of the switch, you can see where now the fire has jumped across and there's no way to stop the flow and it's just accumulating. I think we've got one more shot before it explodes. There we go. Now it's getting ready for the final blast. That's the final shot where it shorts out the power line. The intensity of the light's so great that the camera can't really, it shorted out the camera. So you can't really see you can't see it at this point very clearly. It fuzzed it out, but that's a lot of power there. You're talking about the electrical discharge there is probably equivalent to maybe 20 locomotives running full bore, hauling trains over the Tehachapi Pass.
But I'm sorry, let's take it right, because it's interesting. Plasma is established inside these vacuum switch chambers?
No, the whole idea is to have no plasma, right. But being that the current is not cut off at a zero point in the cycle, as the electrical momentum starts to come thundering back down the line to maintain the current.
So plasma is created?
No, inside it does not create a plasma, but the problem is the voltage gradient goes so high. Can we go back to the first one? When it first starts to blow. Okay. What happens is the voltage gradient now, the electric field around this, we'll get it later. This is not just objects in isolated space. Right. The electric field density has become so severe, okay, that it has to strike out in the atmosphere to create a plasma because it can't create it in the switch. So you might have an electrical field here in the order of maybe 10 or 15 volts per megavolts per centimeter. And so the fire breaks out. See, normally when the switch opens, the remaining fire is dissipated in these opening arms. As you see going through the video, we go step by step. These were live pictures, but we couldn't have they're stunning to watch move. So you can see now the arcs have come off the switch and now found their way back to the line terminals. And there's no way to stop this now. And then the arcs are changing resistance. This is the key thing. The arcs are cyclically changing their resistance with the arcs are cyclically changing their resistance with respect to time on the alternating current cycle. And in the process of doing this, they're creating an imaginary, I would say imaginary, but another dimensional energy that has to come out into this dimension. And this is a process very worthy of study. This is what Steinmetz is mentioning here in Article 241.
Then I mentioned, I thought, because a lot of folks keep getting, like Art Bell, for instance, keep getting these mysterious voltages occurring on their antenna arrays, is that related to this concept here?
No, not directly.
But it does indicate that there's something else coming in from different dimensions that maybe.
Well, what it is basically mutual induction to the ionosphere and the sun. And those electric fields are always changing, but it is an electrical gradient. But there's no plasma other than the sun itself. But then we're getting into a system with much larger dynamics and more factors coming in. Right. Okay, so let's see. Okay, the condition made itself apparent in the line switching equipment of the primordial electric industry. Large transmission lines and substation transformers refused to be de-energized without some large fire or blast. This is a substation going up when they couldn't turn it off. So three shots here. So this is what they were dealing with, and it wasn't a happy situation, and they had no way to stop it. If you tried to turn the stuff off, this is what would happen.
And people got unfriendly about it.